Well, good afternoon, everybody. I am Robert Barouki, and I will chair this session. I would like first to welcome you all on this session on EDCs, endocrine disruptors, and risk assessment and management. We have gathered, I think, fantastic speakers for you today from different origins, and we would like to now I will start with a small introduction on endocrine disruptors so that everybody is at the same stage, and then we can start the conferences by the speakers. So let me start by telling you that pollution is a very important issue, and among the latest reports from the WHO, World Health Organization, you can see that the global death score of is highest related to pollution. It's actually pollution is a higher determinant for death worldwide than tobacco smoking or some infectious diseases. So it's an important issue. It's all pollution, not only, of course, EDC, it's air pollution mostly, but yet it's an important issue that we have to tackle and deal with from both a health and a societal point of view. Let me just remind you what the endocrine system is and EDCs. Actually, you can see here all kinds of organs that are part of the endocrine system. When I was young, it was maybe a few organs, but now it's much larger. In fact, the endocrine system is really all about communication. Endocrine glands sending a message to other tissue and informing them, giving them an information. So it's really communication, physiological communication in the body. And hormones are actually messengers in the body. They are the messages from one organ to the others. So what are endocrine disruptors? In fact, they are fake messages. But these are fake news in a physiological communication. And what basically do is that they bring about a wrong message at the wrong time. And this is a new type actually of toxicology, exactly like fake news are actually somehow a new and important type of toxicity in our social system. But so that's really about the general function of endocrine disruptors. People have been thinking about endocrine disruptor for a long time. I will not make the history. I will just focus on the definition of the endocrine disruptors, actually given already by WHO for quite a while and adopted by the European Union more recently. There are three conditions for a substance, for an exogenous substance or a mixture of substance to be considered as an endocrine disruptor. The first is that it has to alter the endocrine system one way or another, whatever the mechanism. It has to alter the endocrine system. The second condition is that it has to cause an adverse effect on the system, and therefore, like toxicity such as cancer, such as metabolic disease or whatever, what kind of toxicity. And this third condition, extremely important and difficult, is that we have to show that the toxicity is brought about through the alteration of the endocrine system. This is a condition to be called a typical endocrine disruptor, but in fact we have a number of substances that are putative or potential endocrine disruptor because they don't follow all the three rules, but they only follow part of the rules. So this is the actual definition. It's really hard to show that a substance is an endocrine disruptor. There are a number of issues with endocrine disruptor. The dose, many of them actually can act at low doses, and this is something relatively new, not completely new, but relatively new in toxicology, and we have to address that. The time lag, separating the exposure to an endocrine disruptor and the outcomes. Sometimes it's a very large time lag, and this is extremely difficult to establish, like many years or sometimes tens of years, in some cases generation. The vulnerability, it's important to have a system where not only we have the toxicant, but we have the organism that will be influenced by the toxicant. And if the organism is vulnerable, for example, at the fetal stage, then the toxicity is probably likely to be much higher. We also deal with mixtures of compound and interaction between chemicals and other stressors. For example, nutritional stressors or psychological stressors. This is also highly relevant for endocrine disruptor. And finally, We have the classification that is important. I mentioned it earlier. You can have actual endocrine disruptor, but also some that are suspected or presumed endocrine disruptor when they do not have all the properties. There is therefore this new type of toxicology has an impact on risk assessment and management, and there are specific issues that are related to these EDCs that we have to deal with. This is why we have proposed this session, and I hope you will enjoy it. This session, after this introduction, we will have Angel Nadal, who will talk about the role of scientists in influencing public decision and their interaction with policymakers. Crabbé, who will talk about the contribution and expectations of stakeholders, and Stéphane Horel, who will speak about the role of investigative journalism in uncovering the intricacies of public decision making. And then we can have an open discussion. So please don't forget to ask your question in the question and answer section, and we will be happy to answer these questions and start a discussion. With that, I would like to now introduce Dr. Angel Nadal from Spain, who is a good friend and is an excellent scientist in the EDC world, and who has been implicated in transfer of scientific knowledge to the public. So, Angel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Robert, and good afternoon to everybody. I want to thank as well Robert Barouki and Anses, of course, for this invitation. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here today and to be able to share my personal experience during the last 6 years, more or less, in talking to policymakers. And I have entitled my talk, the role of scientists in influencing public decisions and their interactions with policymakers. Well, chemical pollution is one of the main environmental problems that our civilization faces. Within chemical pollution, the impact of low-dose effects of endocrine disruptors in human health and the environment is particularly worrying. Scientific evidence link endocrine disruptor exposures with human health problems that are epidemic at the moment. Examples are the decrease in fertility, diabetes and obesity, endocrine-related cancers, and alteration of thyroid hormone actions. Endocrine disruptor effects are particularly perturbing because they take place during fetal life, affecting the offspring by inducing the alteration of gene expression and increasing susceptibility to suffer different pathologies later in life. During the last decade, animal-based studies clearly indicate that the effects of endocrine disruptors can be inherited. And this is really a point of very high concern, because it implies that we may experience now the effects of chemicals like DDT, for instance, to which our great-grandparents were exposed, and very likely our great-grandchildren will suffer consequences from our chemical exposure. In conclusion, exposure to endocrine disruptors may affect several generations, and therefore this issue is not only an important matter, it's also a matter of great urgency. Well, in this graph here that I took from this really was inspiring article that I read, the graph shows how awareness evolved as a function of time for practically any environmental, you can see awareness here and time here, and this evolution is something that happened practically for any environmental issue. So if we focus now on endocrine disruptors, awareness started in the field during the 90s, the 70s, and the 80s, when scientists working in different fields, including endocrinology, zoology, cell biology, cancer research, ecology, and toxicology, were working in the consequences of the ethyl-stilbestrol treatment. And the celebration of a series of 3 key meetings that were named estrogens in the environment that were occurring at the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences in North Carolina, that was settling the beginning of the endocrine disruptors field, which really started in 1991 at the Windspread Conference, where the term endocrine disruptor was coined and a seminal statement was published, initiating the field, as I said, in this particular year. Here in the European Union, the Weybridge meeting took place in 1996, and it was entitled The Impact of Endocrine Disruptors on Human Health and Wildlife, which aimed to address the scope of the endocrine disruptor issue within a European context. After this meeting here in Europe and a similar one in the US, awareness grew dramatically, as you can see here in the plot, and during the mid-90s and the beginning of this century. And indeed, the health and environmental international organizations, such as the World Health Organization and United Nations, and also the European Union, recognized that the problem existed. During the last 15 years, however, awareness has been going up and down, as we can see here, depending on accusations and denials among several stakeholders. And these accusations and denials have been in a great part generated not really by scientific controversy, but by protection of vested interests by some stakeholders. And during all these years, independent scientists have continued claiming that the problem was unresolved. Like in many other environmental issues, these never-ending denials by some stakeholders have delayed the initiation of effective political actions for more than a decade. Finally, I think we are now more or less where this cycle is. Awareness is still very high among the public, which is more sensitive to the problem than years ago, and indeed is demanding solutions. Awareness is also high among media and stakeholders as well. And the authorities have begun to launch policies in the European Union, which indeed, I must say, is leader worldwide in this issue. The last October, the European Union launched the Chemical Strategy for Sustainability with the aim of better protect European citizens and to boost innovation for sustainable chemicals. The chemical strategy still needs implementation, and I think we all stakeholders must take part in helping to this implementation here in the European Union. In any case, I think we are still far of the ideal situation that is probably the one that I'm going to read now and that I took from this document that was published some years ago by the United Nations Environmental Program, and the document is titled 21 Issues for the 21st Century. And it says the need for a new approach for minimizing risks of novel technologies and chemicals. A new approach should be considered by which their implications are systematically and comprehensively assessed before they reach the production phase, with the aim to minimize their risk to society and nature. In summary, test chemicals before they go onto the market. And this, that seems to be logic and common sense. And indeed, I thought that chemicals were tested before going onto the market, before starting, to work in endocrine disruptors, but this doesn't occur. And I think still some years until facing this situation that will be the ideal. In summary, worldwide, endocrine disruptors continue after 30 years to be a major health and environmental issue. And this happens despite that independent scientists have communicated this issue from the very beginning. And this is not different from other environmental issues. It's more or less the same pattern, year more, year less. And why that happens? Well, an important part is communication, between or among scientists, managers, and policymakers, which needs to be effective in order to have successful policies. But this mutual effective communication is difficult. And it is many times unsuccessful because scientists and non-scientists, we speak different languages. We have different perspectives and different priorities as well. And this is shown in this example that I put here. And we can see how for scientists, we have a more direct pathway that policy makers in general that have to look to many different priorities and perspectives that we do. In any case, in order to have an effective communication, we scientists must understand the full array of issues, something that sometimes is not easy. And in any case, the core of our contribution as scientists should be the scientific point of view, undiluted by political positions, economics, or other issues. And on the other side, managers and policymakers, they must understand that health and environment, they don't care about economics, social needs, or political circumstances. And this is also difficult, and of course it requires time. In summary, the main role of scientists is to provide the appropriate communication of science-based evidence for a proper guiding of endocrine disruptors policies. The qualified information must be unbiased and free of vested interest. Scientists working in the field of endocrine disruptors should be the pertinent interlocutors to provide the qualified information. And I think this is an important point. Having a PhD, for instance, or an academic position, being professor or associate professor at the university, these really don't qualify a person as an expert on endocrine disruptors. An expert should be actively working or have work in the field of endocrine disruptors for a number of years. Endocrine disruptors use endocrine modes of actions and alter hormone action. Therefore, basic and clinical endocrinologies should be an important part in advising policymakers. Surprisingly, there are not many endocrinologists in committees where decisions are made, and this is a lack that must be corrected. Well, all my experience in talking to some policymakers have been under the umbrella of the Endocrine Society. The Endocrine Society englobes more than 18,000 members from 120 countries, so it's a very international society, and 40% of their members are Europeans. Members are basic researchers, clinical scientists, and clinical in practices working to improve health worldwide. The Endocrine Society is involved in the European Union EDC criteria and now the chemical strategy process and implementation. And we are involved in the European Union EDC policy decision and implementation since 2013. In 2017, the Endocrine Disrupting Chemicals Advocacy group started. I led the group during 3 years, and now is led by Professor Barbara Demeneix from the National Museum of Natural History in Paris. It's a multidisciplinary group of independent scientists, including clinicians and basic scientists as well. The members of the group, we all work in endocrine disruptors, and we have generated influential science to the field. This creates an authoritative voice able to give qualified, unbiased, and free of vested interest information. The Endocrine Society has been a long-standing champion of ensuring that endocrine science is reflected in policies and regulations to improve public health by reducing exposure to harmful endocrine disrupting chemicals. These documents here are some of the foundational publications that we normally use when talking with policymakers around the world. The Endocrine Society is involved in global efforts to reduce exposure to harmful chemicals. We are participants in a United Nations environmental program called the Strategic Approach to International Chemicals Management, SAGIM, that has adopted resolutions on EDCs calling for greater awareness, raising and improved scientific evaluation of endocrine disruptors for human health and ecological harms. We are also engaged in WHO projects on EDCs. The group also does advocacy in the States. We meet with regulatory agencies such as the United States Environmental Protection Agency, which has an endocrine disruptor screening program, and we conduct educational briefings with members of the Congress, and we work with the National Institute of Health as well. We have waited on the draft report for the Clarity BPA study, and submitting some public comments for peer review meetings related to the Clarity BPA. And here in the European Union, we are doing advocacy in 2013, and we have influenced the EDC criteria. Meetings, we have participated in meetings with different policy makers. We have participated in events and briefings at the European Commission, and also we have participated in workshops at EFSA, particularly related to the issue of bisphenol A. And these are some examples of our participation. This was in 2017, was a briefing organized by the European Popular Party, where we participate with other stakeholders, and we debate there about endocrine disruptors and possible solutions. We participate also in this briefing here together with the European Society of Endocrinology, and was organized by members of the European Parliament from the Social Democrats and the Liberals in the Parliament. And in these briefings and meetings, we always urge for a faster action on the EDC strategy. We have continued our advocacy even during the pandemic, and we have influenced the chemical strategy. We had meetings with the commissioner of DG Santé, with Mrs. Stella Kyriakidis, and also with the commissioner of DG Environment, Mr. Sikevicius, and here with Cristina de Avila as well, who is the director of Sustainable Chemicals, also of DG Environment. And here is the whole task force, the European task force of the Endocrine Society, visiting the Parliament in December 2019, just before the pandemic, when we didn't have to wear masks at that time. So we had meetings during this year as well with several members of the European Parliament, and we sent a letter to Vice President Timmermans, led by the Endocrine Society, but co-signed by 10 European scientific societies, including the European Society for Endocrinology and the National Endocrine Societies of France, Germany, and Spain as well. And with that, we have some accomplishment. In the European Union, we have prevented dangerous loopholes for the EDC criteria and include some health protective provision related to EDCs in the chemical strategy. In the US, we prevented a rule that would limit the use of some scientific studies, and we have congressional briefings about PFAS and participated in OECD as well for adverse outcome pathways at the global level. So as a summary, effective, qualified science-based information, free of bias and vested interest, can be accomplished through leading scientific societies such as the Endocrine Society. And that's all I wanted to share with you, and I'm open to questions and discussion, of course. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angel, for this excellent talk. I have a couple of questions now. Well, the first one is that you mentioned you and I are academic scientists, and you try to influence public decision, but we have competition. We have competition from people from the industry-funded, science, or industry people, or lobbyists, that also are scientists and that also try to influence. How do you think public authorities should deal with both, both kinds of scientists?
Yeah, I think that's indeed is an important point, as you know very well. I think they must listen to all the voices that are in this debate and and I think the authorities, I think they know which is the voice that is more free of vested interest. And I think this is the very important point.
Yeah.
Because the delay during the last 10 years is not really about the controversy of, for instance, low dose of endocrine disruptors. I think this is very much accepted by the scientific community.
Yeah.
Is because there are some stakeholders that continue denying what has been demonstrated in experiments all around the world in many laboratories. And this is what the authorities need to distinguish. So I'm not saying that I think we all stakeholders must be, involved in solving this. But I mean, there are some things that cannot be denied again and again and again.
Okay, yeah, I understand. I guess we will get back to this in the final discussion, but I think some interesting, questions coming from the audience here. One of them is that, Angel, you stated in your talk that the core of the contribution that we should have should be the scientific point of view, undiluted by political position, economic, and other issues. But the question from the audience is that, don't you think that taking also into account economic and social factors in exposure assessment should also contribute to better characterize the risks and impacts?
Yeah, let's see. When I said that, I want to point that I was referring to the message that we scientists must give. That is, without our independent of our political positions and social establishment. So we must focus on science. And it is true that, I mean, we are citizens as well, and we all know that economics is important and social needs as well. And I think policymakers have this into consideration as well. This is happening now, I think, also with COVID-19. You know, I mean, the problem that I think we all understand now with COVID-19 and can be translated to other issues as endocrine disruptors is that really health or environment, they don't care very much about our economy, and decision must be made. If really, there is a prejudice to our health. So of course, we must consider that, and is being considered, I think, by also during the pandemic and in endocrine disruptors, but be aware as well that our health and environment, they don't care about our economy. It's the same with climate change.
I guess the person who asked was thinking about the fact that maybe the social condition or economic condition of an individual or a group is also a vulnerability factors to chemical insults. I mean, and we know, and that's, I think, acceptable.
Yeah. Absolutely agree with that. Thank you for pointing this to me. And indeed it is. I mean, we all know, and we know that poor people and countries in development and countries in Africa and other places are suffering more than we can suffer here in the European Union, the exposure to endocrine disruptors probably, and this is something that needs to be solved, of course. And taken into consideration. Agree.
Yes. Another question also from the audience is that this relates actually to a previous session that we had in this Anses meeting about citizen science. How could citizens, consumers, contribute to the research on endocrine disruptor in your belief, or in the Endocrine Society vision? Do you have any?
In what kind of contribution are you thinking, really? To the research, you mean, or to?
Well, I mean, there is also, it's really about research, and maybe I would call it implementation research. I mean, if how much information should, for example, the citizen get, and how much feedback they should give to, for example, an epidemiological study on these issues. And so I think it's a sort of bidirectional interaction with the scientists.
Absolutely. I think, well, the public is very much aware now of the problem, and this has been thanks to the media as well. They have done a tremendous good work in general, I would say, and I think the citizens are very much aware of that. I think what we try to provide from the Endocrine Society, I mean, some members of the group, is to give some advice to citizens to follow and try to decrease exposure to some of these daily endocrine disruptors, and try to decrease exposure. That is what we can do as citizens. So they can follow our advice. Also advice from other stakeholders, for NGOs, etc. in that term. And of course, I think in terms of epidemiology, the citizenship can really help very, very much if they provide, data, that's of course very important.
And they can feedback on the information that they get, because they get a lot of information, and if they give a real feedback, then we know how to adjust, I think, the information. I have another provocative question for you, which is, you state that scientists are, unbiased, and you consider that scientists are unbiased. Are you so sure of that? I mean, some people think that maybe sometimes scientists, for example, never publish negative results. They don't like to publish negative. I mean, they usually cannot. So if you only publish your positive result, this may be a bias. What do you think of that?
I mean, this is, of course, probably no one is fully free of bias. I mean, we are human beings after all. But I think, I mean, when for instance, as well as you, I think I'm an independent scientist in the sense that my salary is paid by the government of Spain. You know, I'm a civil servant. I'm not paid by anyone else, and I don't take money by anyone else, and I just do my research, which is also free, is the research I want to do with public money. And this is what I try to say when I say I'm biased, compare to other scientists that can be working for the industry or any other stakeholder. Yeah. Of course, it is true that scientists in general, we don't publish negative results because, well, as you know, journals don't want to have negative results. That's the main problem. And we live in the impact factor era and all that stuff. I mean, this is true. Yeah. But of course, what we don't do is to give only partial information, let's say.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So let me summarize as that scientists are not perfect, but they are human beings. I mean, that's something we have learned today, and we have learned a lot more.
Yeah.
I think we can continue the discussion a little bit later, but for now, I think we have to shift to the next speaker. Thank you very much, Angel, and we'll see you back later.
Thanks very much, Robert.
You're welcome. And now the next speaker is Dr. Anne Crabbé from Belgium for the University of Antwerp. I have known Anne through the European program HBM4U and really enjoyed working with her. So I think, Anne, the floor is yours now.
Thank you very much, Robert, for this introduction. I hope I am well hearable for all of you.
You are?
Yes, and I see Robert nodding, so this is good news. So thank you very much for inviting me to this breakout session on EDCs. I prepared this presentation together with Dries Koertjens and Ilse Loots. The three of us are affiliated to the Faculty of Social Sciences at Antwerp University, and we are all sociologists. We are indeed participating, as Robert already indicated, in HBM4EU, which is a European project, European funded project to stimulate also the harmonization of human biomonitoring in Europe. And in that project, Dries, Ilse and I are responsible for a work package in which we organize dialogues between scientists, policymakers, but also societal stakeholders on what comes out of the project and on, for example, results of human biomonitoring. In this particular talk of today, I will talk about the contribution and expectations of stakeholders in the debate on EDCs. And I think, as already been highlighted several times, both by Robert, but also by Angel, it is true that societal stakeholders do have a firm voice in the societal debate and also intervene in discussions that are going on between the scientists on the one hand and the policymakers on the other hand. As already indicated, there has been a long tradition of scientific research on endocrine disruptors, but also the history of policy attention for EDCs. at the European Union is going already a long way, because since the 1990s, and in fact since 1999, the European Commission has a strategy on endocrine disruptors. Since 2013, we have the Environment Action Programme, and that put on the agenda the harmonization of hazard-based criteria for the identification of endocrine disruptors. We have establishment of scientific criteria to identify substances with endocrine disrupting properties via the Plant Protection Products Regulation and the Biocidal Products Regulation. And in addition, regulatory provisions for endocrine disruptors are covered under REACH, the Regulation on Cosmetics, EU legislation on food contact materials, and so on. And as also has been highlighted by Angel, we recently also have the publication of the EU Chemical Strategy for Sustainability, which is a new milestone, in fact, also for dealing with these EDCs. And even though there is a lot of policy attention going to EDCs, we notice that environment and health NGOs are not really content with the situation. They ask for more regulatory initiatives. They talk for different regulatory initiatives. And on this slide, I would like to highlight why that is. Now, one of the frustrations of environment and health NGOs is that only a small number of EDCs have been regulated in the last decades. While they say, well, all this substance by substance approaching of EDC is not really helping us a lot, because we see a lot of regrettable substitutions, and the environment and health NGOs, they ask for example, a group restriction approach in which we step back from the substance by substance regulation and try to tackle the problems with EDCs more group by group. Now, what is also a little bit frustrating for environment and health NGOs is that risk assessors and regulators have the tendency to keep looking for threshold values, to know more from scientists what is the dose that would have an impact on human health, and based on that information to set norms that could be lived upon by the industry. But what is characteristic for EDCs is that they are non-threshold substances. Even a small dose can have health impacts, and this leads environment and health NGOs to formulate a plea for a non-toxic environment, a plea that is well heard by the European Commission working on a strategy for the non-toxic environment. And of course, there is also the recognition and the frustration a little bit with the environment and health NGOs that science is in evolution, that there are still things being discovered, and in fact, they are asking to speed up the testing, the screening and the identification of EDCs because the lists are becoming longer and longer. And on top of that, they are very worried about the impacts of several groups of chemicals on our health, and they want to have scientists monitor the health and environment impacts not only of the single substances but also of groups of substances and mixture effects of, for example, these endocrine disruptors. I have talked a little bit about the point of view of environment and health NGOs, but at the other side of the spectrum, you also have the opinions and values of the industry and the agricultural sectors. And they both have their own discourses, and they are quite opposing to one another. As already been indicated, the industry and agriculture, they are more reluctant to have more regulation. They point out that strict EU rules already exist, which are enforced at the national level. They don't like to have regulatory initiatives at the national level. They consistently refer to the European level due to the impact on the single market of regulations. And they are not opposed to having more research, but as already has been indicating, they are especially in favor of research in which they are actively involved. So what industry and agriculture state is that in spite of the critics coming from environment and health NGOs, the industry and agriculture sector state that they are already very cautious in their use of chemical products. So they want to get away from the image that has been created that they are doing wrong to society by integrating chemical substances in their products that are harmful for humans and for the environment. Now, in the next slides, I will talk about the role that societal stakeholders take up in the discussions on EDCs. And the most referred to role of these stakeholders is that they do a lot of lobby work and that they try to influence the agenda setting on the matter. Now, this leads to initiatives that they take themselves to get EDCs on the societal, political and policy agenda. For example, introducing awareness campaigns, highlighting, for example, the health impact of EDCs, but they are also very present in the policy debates on EDCs, and that for many years. So they actively contribute to discussions in EU expert groups, political and stakeholder meetings, and public consultations of EU agencies such as ECHA and EFSA. So they are quite busy on the topic of EDCs. Some have focused their activities particularly on EDCs and focus on that chemical substances. On this slide, I highlight that there is a difference between environment and health NGOs on the one hand and industry and agricultural organizations on the other hand, due to the fact that they differ in the resources that they own to have an influence on policy discussions. And this leads to a difference in power between them. One thing that we notice is that the number of sector organizations working for the industry and agriculture are much bigger in number in comparison to NGOs working on environment and health issues. A second characteristic is that they differ in the resources that they have available to have an influence in these lobby activities. One thing that is remarkable is that the number of staff that they have available to attend all these meetings, for example, and to be active in the public consultations of ECHA and EFSA, for example, well, the number of staff is in comparison to the industry and agriculture organizations much lower in number. However, and this is something that not only I, but also colleagues who are doing similar things as I in organizing these dialogues between different types of stakeholders, policymakers, and scientists, is that we notice that a professionalization has been going on also with the environment and health organizations. What we see is that they hire people with a PhD, well aware of the discussions and having good disciplinary backgrounds to have a good professional input in these discussions, which is a thing that helps to further the quality of the discussions that we are having. Despite that, it is still not very easy for environment and health organizations to get their point of view on the tables. And one of the tactics that we see appearing now is over-representation of industries and agriculture stakes in meetings. What we have experienced ourselves is that industry and agriculture organizations ask to send quite a lot of people to the meetings that we organize. So they are bigger in number often in those meetings, and if you are bigger in number, then the chances of being heard for environment and health organizations get a little bit lower because of the numeric overrepresentation of stakeholders of industry and agriculture. To cope with that situation, what we also see is coalition building on the environment and health NGO side, and a very well-known example of that is the setup of the EDC Free Europe Coalition, which includes more than 70 partners from trade unions, consumer organizations, public health and healthcare professionals, women's groups, etc., etc. So by joining forces, they can, of course, join up resources, join up expertise, what makes them a little bit stronger and more powerful also in the discussions. I already indicated the most referred to role of stakeholders is the role of lobbying and being represented in dialogues on the matter. But there are also some other roles that stakeholders take up. And in the next two slides, I will give some examples. We see, for example, that some civil society organizations organize their own small human biomonitoring activities, and the results of that are used for agenda setting reasons and also for awareness raising. They develop information brochures or develop informative website for a broad audience to inform citizens about potential risks and strategies to avoid exposure to EDCs. And this is particularly focused on vulnerable groups, such as, for example, pregnant women. And the two images you see on the left-hand side refer to brochures that were developed by the Flemish sector organization for households and the German variant of that, Bund. Two other roles that stakeholders take up. Sometimes they test consumer products for the presence of EDCs, and they report publicly about it. Antwerp is a Belgian, Flemish organization that has activities in that respect. And what we also see is that civil organizations, society organizations, organize surveys to find out about people's perceptions on EDC, and they communicate about the results. Why do I give this these examples of other roles that stakeholders take up? I want to illustrate with that the fact that stakeholder organizations are kind of stepping into the role of public authorities, often because they have the opinion that it takes public authorities too long to undertake effective action. Now, looking at a representation of a classical policy cycle like we use in policy analysis, you see that there are different stages in the policy cycle, and in fact in each and one of them environment and health NGOs could play a role. But what we see often is that the perception is there that societal organizations only are active in the first stages. So, for example, giving expression of their concerns about chemicals, being active in agenda setting, so getting the problem of EDCs on the agenda and helping in defining the problem and identifying potential solutions. But what we think is that there is also another role to play for environment and health NGOs in these other phases of the policy cycle. And what we see in the last decade is that there comes a plea more and more from experts on science society policy dialogues such as Ortwin Ren to evolve from a risk management approach to a rich governance approach in which stakeholders can have a role in the various stages of the policy cycle. So what this risk governance approach is all about is that, in fact, it could be valuable to have these societal stakeholders present in the different stages because, for example, they can bring in their own knowledge on the matter, that they can also help to build up legitimacy of the measures taken. So here on this slide, you see the various phases in this figure of Ortwin Ren. And what is my point here? That even though societal stakeholders are often associated a lot with pre-assessment of risk, they can also help in the appraisal. Assessing the technical and perceived causes and consequences of risks, but also characterizing and evaluating what we have to do with this information in view of the risk management. This would imply that, in fact, it is a combination of building up joint understanding and also building up capacity to go towards joint decision-making on the risks of chemicals. We have some experiments going on, not only in the HBM4EU context, but also in the Flemish environment and health studies, in which we involve societal stakeholders at the one hand at the prioritization of substances, but also we involve them in discussing the outcomes of HBM studies. And that can contribute to, for example, informing society what comes out of the analysis, letting societal stakeholders help in the interpretation, letting them help in the outreach of the results, for example, by communicating about these results in their information campaigns, and also letting them help to think about possible actions. What can governments do, but also what can they do as societal stakeholders with regard to, for example, creating more awareness. And in the last slide, I list up some of the advantage of that approach. And here you see 4 arguments or advantages that we see. In fact, often these are opposed by scientists because they say these dialogues interfere with the evidence-based information that they provide to policymakers, but in fact, the societal stakeholders can also bring in their own knowledge and values. It can increase the level of democracy, in fact, and it can also lead to co-ownership. So that is a very instrumental argument to have a risk governance approach. So I am going a little bit over time, for which I apologize. So I would like to round up here with these last words.
Thank you very much, and
thank you.
Excellent, excellent talk. And yeah, we have a number of questions. Let me start with all these developments of stakeholder, different types of stakeholder. Do you think that the impact of science per se on public decision has increased or decreased lately? How would you rate it, if you can?
Well, if I may refer to the current pandemic, it is for sure the case that scientists are very much present in the public debate about how to deal with the pandemic. So the citizens have become more visible in the last months, the last year. I think that, in fact, the role of scientists will continue to be important for policymakers as they want to be provided with solid information on which to base their arguments on for making decisions about the policies that they are developing.
Yeah.
On the other hand, as already indicated by Angel as well, it is also the role of policymakers to take into account the other stakes and the other arguments, and that makes their role not easy, and sometimes they are criticized by the fact that they just don't follow the instructions or the suggestions of the experts, but it is their role in a democratic representative society to balance the different arguments and to take a decision based on that information.
Yeah, obviously. We have a number of other questions from the audience. One of them is, how to ensure a balanced representation of the different groups of stakeholders and not having one group having higher weight in the decision than others? How would you do that in governance?
Well, in fact, we had some experience also at the European level of organizing a debate between the different types of actors, including societal stakeholders, and we just made rules of the game in which we tried to balance the representation of the different stakes in that way that they were not overrepresented. But you see that there is pressure from particular stakeholders, organizations, to come with a lot of people. So it is important for those who are organizing the dialogue to be aware of that and to prevent that some voices are sounding louder in the discussions than others. But it's not easy to do that.
Yeah, I agree. So and when you mentioned new governance, for example, and so how would you envision the role of industry in this new governance? I mean, and to make sure that everything follows the rules and the absence of conflict of interest, etc. So how do you ensure that? I mean, we have one question about that.
Yeah, I think that I think it's important to have their voice in the debate. We don't want to exclude anyone, also because they often have important inside knowledge from the production facilities that they have to share with others, in case they want to share it, of course. But I think it's important to have them around the table, but it takes also a good and strong facilitator to get a focused discussion and to prevent that some voices, as I already stated, are sounding louder into the debate. This means that you have to develop good rules of the game, good rules for the discussion, so that there is a respectful dialogue possible between the various actors involved.
Yeah,
I hope that answers the question.
Well, well, that's certainly one way around. It's not easy, and we know it's not going to be easy. But I think with a lot of explanation and work, we can, I guess, we can achieve something. I just want to make a comment on some of the vocabulary we have been using. Actually, we mentioned, for example, academic scientists at one point. Of course, we don't mean that the only scientists are academic scientists. We have excellent scientists in academia, publicly funded or privately funded. We have excellent scientists in industry, of course, in agencies too. I mean, we are here in a meeting organized by an agency, so we may be using a little bit too quickly, the term academic scientists. There are many scientists all over the place, and they have to contribute. One of the questions, actually, it's a comment I also notice, is that it's so difficult to prove that a substance is an endocrine disruptor that it takes a long time. And so what should happen in the meantime? I mean, clearly it takes a long time to prove that a substance is an endocrine disruptor. When should we start taking decisions, basically?
Well, I think that the plea for precaution is a very relevant plea, I think, from the environment and health NGO side. But that doesn't mean, because precaution is often associated to not allowing anything anymore. Mm-hmm. But that is not my interpretation of precaution. I think we should allow innovation. We should well monitor the effects, and we should timely intervene when we notice that there is something going wrong. But this also implies that we need a transparency to openly discuss what comes out of research, what comes out of the monitoring of humans, etc. So this would require a very good organized follow-up in order to ensure that things don't get out of hand.
Okay, thank you. There are many other questions, but we have to stop now, and we can take them back into the general discussion. Thank you very much, Anne. Excellent talk. And now we have to move to the next speaker, Stéphane Horel, who is a journalist. Many of you know her, a journalist from Le Monde, and she has done a lot of very sophisticated inquiries in the field of toxicity and endocrine disruptors. Stéphane?
Hello, good afternoon, good morning, everyone, for those who are not in Europe. Thank you very much, Robert, and thank you very much to Anses for inviting me, although I've not been always very kind to regulatory agencies in my work. So as Robert said, I've been working on EDCs for quite a while now, for about 15 years, and my main focus has been to investigate the economic interests around the EDC issue and the industry's maneuvers to delay regulation of EDCs. So my first point will be broadly to explain what lobbying is and how it's done on scientific issues, which is very specific, a very specific way of lobbying. And then I will tell you 3 stories, because my job is to tell stories, right? So 3 stories of science under attack on this issue of EDCs. So first of all, one thing to know before everything is that lobbying is not a conspiracy theory. It's not corruption. Lobbying is legal. Lobbying happens every day. So it has to be taken into account when you are interested in any regulation making. And lobbying is basically, it's about scraping, watering down, diverting, delaying, or writing the law. And so Robert said earlier that EDCs send the wrong message EDCs send the wrong message at the wrong time. Well, lobbying is about sending the right message to the right person at the right moment, and lobbyists are messengers too. On scientific issues, there's this strategy that has been covered and documented for more than, I think, 15 years now, about what we call manufacturing doubt. Those tactics are very well studied, as I said, and we've known them since the end of the 90s, more precisely, after the master settlement in the US, when the tobacco companies lost in justice and had to release all their internal documents to the public. And the study of those documents has allowed academics and journalists and NGOs to figure out what was the strategy of the tobacco industry to delay any regulation of cigarettes after it was found out in 1953 that cigarettes could cause lung cancer. What we've learned from those documents is that the tobacco companies deliberately manufactured doubt about the hazards of cigarettes by creating pseudo-controversies and creating the illusion that there's no consensus in the scientific, in the competent scientific community about tobacco hazards. And this strategy has been reused, recycled, and adapted by many other sectors: chemicals, pesticides, asbestos, climate change, oil, you name it, food industry a lot lately. So the trouble begins for industry when academics and independent researchers, sometimes it can be scientists within agencies, that produced studies that show some harmful effects of chemicals. So usually industry and their allies see those studies as what we call uncomfortable knowledge, and not science to make their products better or to improve them. So what they try to do is to minimize evidence, highlight uncertainty, this idea of creating controversies, and attack and undermine the reputations of scientists themselves, of the studies, but also of institutions. And we've seen this in the past years with the IARC, after IARC classified meat and glyphosate as carcinogenic and probably carcinogenic. And the way for the best way to do this for industry is to do what we call science washing, that is to publish lobbying material in scientific journals. And it can take many forms: sponsored reviews, reanalysis of raw data, critiques, and letters. So the actors in these controversies are usually scientists, but they are not of the same nature. Some have ties with industry or support industry's positions, and you can have both at the same time. But sometimes it's not the same. It doesn't mean that scientists who have ties with industry are corrupted. It has nothing to do with corruption. It's just the fact that some scientists collaborate with industry. It's not illegal. And it's just better to make it transparent, which is not often the case, as we will see. The other type of scientists work in the mostly in the academic world, and this is what I would call the competent scientific community, as André underlined earlier. This is when you're a journalist and you also look for expertise to understand a topic, and you go to the most competent scientists you can find. And on this topic, the Endocrine Society has been extremely proactive to inform the decision makers. And there were also some international institutions present, like the WHO and UNEP. I will come back to that a little later. So that's a more precise version of the stakeholders who were implicated. It's just the beginning, because now it's more diverse, and on the NGO side especially. But you've got broadly this is what we call trade associations, European Crop Protection Association, American Chemistry Councils. Those are industry associations. So you had mostly pesticides, chemicals, also AmCham, which is an organization that is based in Brussels and represents the interest of 60 American companies. The three main manufacturers of pesticides at that time, Bayer, BASF, and Syngenta. And at that time, the coalition of environmental health associations, NGOs, was HEAL. And just to give you this idea of what Anne said earlier about overrepresentation in terms of weight, of economic weight and resources that these actors can deploy. At that time, the CEFIC, which is the chemical industry trade association, declared 40 million euros in lobbying expenses in the Brussels Transparency Register, and they had 150 staff at that time, which make of CEFIC the biggest lobbying organization in Brussels. And HEAL, in comparison, had 650,000 euros budget with 8 staff. So this is, on a daily basis, a real difference in terms of resources to influence the regulator, which is at that time was the EU Commission. I won't get into the details of the various milestones of this saga of the regulation of endocrine disruptors at the EU level, but it started in 2009 with the pesticides regulation. It should have ended in 2013 because of a deadline set by the Parliament, but the Commission missed it because it bent to the pressure of the lobbying of those organizations that I mentioned. Sweden sued the Commission for this delay. The Commission was condemned by the EU Court of Justice, and finally we got the criteria much later, 4 years after the deadline. So let's get into the stories. The first one is about this WHO UNEP report that was published contrary to what the date indicates on the front cover. And in 2013, so it was written by around 20 competent scientists in the area, and concluded that EDCs represent a global threat that needs to be resolved. So that was not not eau tiède, we say in French. It was a report really raising the alarm on the EDC issue. The pesticides and chemical industries gathered forces and resources to commission a review of this report. So what you've got here is the email through which CEFIC and ECPA in green, and all the redacted names are the names of people who were in charge of the EDC regulation within the Commission. So DG and means DG Environment, DG Enterprise, Sanko is Health. So, and they attached this review. This is the review. It's called Critical Comments on the report. What's interesting for when I'm investigating who who did what. Of course, there's the disclosure that was very clear on this comment, but it's not always the case. And the affiliations here are very clear. You have Exponent and Gradient. Those are product defense companies. These are specialized lobbying firms. They are specialized in science. They employ medical doctors, scientists, toxicologists, epidemiologists with PhDs to produce this kind of lobbying material to be published in scientific journals. These are very big companies. Exponent is the biggest in this domain of product defense companies, and the best reference and resource on the way these companies operate is a great book by David Michaels called "Doubt is Their Product." It's a Bible on these issues. Now, a few words about the journal in which this review was published. Regulatory Toxicology and Pharmacology is a well-known journal for science washing. It's a journal that is the journal of the International Society for Regulatory Toxicology and Pharmacology, which is not a learned society at all. It's been very opaque on its fundings for many years. The sponsors are last time they disclosed their sponsors was in 2009, if I'm correct. And so you can see the chemical industry, the tobacco industry, pesticides industry, you name it. Second example, we are going to have a closer look at this article that was published in 2013 and called Endocrine Disruption, Fact or Urban Legend. So that's an interesting title for a scientific article. Let's read the conflict of interest disclosure. The opinions forwarded in the article represent personal opinions of the authors and are proposed with the aim to improve the safety assessment of personal care products. That's very unusual. The authors received no support or compensation for writing the article. They therefore declare no conflict of interest. Right. This is what they call a research article. Let's read. It's the end of the article, but it's quite representative of the whole content. What they say is most researchers in the field of EDCs, and more importantly politicians handling our research funds, are men. Could this be a coincidence? One may wonder whether the entire issue of EDC is more within the competence of Dr. Sigmund Freud than that of toxicology. So one can really see that's a very insightful research article. But who are these people, right? The first one, the affiliation that is indicated in the article is like a personal address somewhere in France, Les Caillons. I mean, that's really not an affiliation, but it just takes 1 second to enter the name of this person in Google and find out that he's the scientific director for global safety research and development at L'Oréal, the cosmetics company. Christopher Borgert is an industry consultant. He's been a consultant for industries for many years, and that makes you really wonder why the affiliation he indicated for this article was the university. Probably I don't remember, but I remember have checked that he's giving a course sometimes in this university, but his main job is a consultant. So why not use the professional activity that takes most of his time? Then you've got Daniel Dietrich, who's an academic and very often co-author of this kind of publications. And the last one, Carl Rosman, on whom it was very difficult to find any information because he's been retired for 3 years, retired for a long time, and he had no publication in 3 years. So you can conclude from just this basic information that it might not be a relevant article for a decision maker, right? But it ended up in the impact assessment of the EU Commission, and the impact assessment is a document on which the Commission has based the EDC criteria. So it's a very important document, and it's to make an impact assessment, the Commission makes public consultations, and public consultations are the moment where all stakeholders can feed in their views, documents, Commission studies. And what you can see somewhere in this very thick impact assessment is that this article is quoted, referenced, and is used to minimize the conclusions of the WHO UNEP report. So there's this asymmetry between a report that was written by 20 prominent experts and this article that is not relevant in terms of science, but it's taken into account. This example is to show that lobbying works. Then our third example. It's a more recent story. It happened in April 2020 when a group of scientists and consultants published an editorial simultaneously in several journals. And basically their argument was that the exposure to EDCs was so negligible that no regulation was needed. The declaration of interest was clear, no conflict of interest, no known competing financial interests. The core group of the scientists is always the same. There has been since 2013 similar kind of similar editorials or letters to journals who contain always the same core names. What is interesting is that many of those scientists had declared conflicting interests very recently, just a few weeks before, declaring they hadn't any in the editorial. So I'll just take this example of Colin Berry, who declared on the website of the Science Media Center that he had been a consultant for BASF, Monsanto, and that he chairs the ethics committee of Syngenta. So, of course, all these companies have an interest in the regulation of EDCs. So one should assume that this would be an interest to declare. Second example, I'm just taking the alphabetical list. Bas Blabauer, who's a Dutch scientist, and he's very clearly listed as a member of the scientific advisory board of a research project by Cosmetics Europe, which is the trade association for the cosmetics industry, and I just added, for pleasure, the logos of those companies. This is to give you just a glimpse of how I work on this kind of investigations. I have like almost 20 names to check, and so I'm counting. I'm putting my research in the central column with the links and all the references where the conflicts of interest or declarations of interest were referenced, and then I count. I made statistics, and the result was that so I systematically the collaborations with industry in the past, in the 3 years preceding publication, and 9 had collaborated with industry and should probably have declared it in the editorial, and beyond the lag of 3 years, 15 of them had collaborated at some point in their career with industry, but not just once, several times. of course, another important issue, it's not only about competing interest, it's also about competence, right? So indeed, during my investigation, I talked with Anna Soto and her team, someone of her team, Victoria Buffa, and they started making statistics and through literature analysis of the publications of those people. Are they, with the question, are they skilled on endocrine disruptors? Have they published about this? On behalf of which kind of scientific research are they talking to EU regulators? And so they could find only 12 out of 45 publications from that on the topic. Descant had 12 publications in the previous 3 years, but that includes 3 editorials, 3 industry-sponsored studies, and the same editorial of April 2020 published 6 times. As for Kai Saberlein, he had not a single publication on the topic. So this is my last slide. So all this investigation ended up on the front page of the science supplement of Le Monde, on this who were these 19 scientists and who, on behalf of whom, were they talking, which of course I couldn't conclude, but what is as a conclusion for the whole presentation, what I think is striking is that I think it's strange that it would be to investigative journalists to do this kind of research, and the public power, the decision makers, should check who's talking to them and maybe rely more on the competent scientific community and representative learned societies than scientists who come out of the blue with advice.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Stéphane. I wasn't sure did you finish or not. Yes, no problem. Thank you for this presentation. Let me start with a the curiosity question about how do you as journalists know that you can trust a source, that you can trust a scientist that you are talking to? Of course, we understand that you can go and inquire and see what are the conflicts of interest and support and publication. This is one side, but you can be, for example, let me take an example. I mean, you can be an endocrinologist, but know nothing about toxic compounds and metabolism of xenobiotics and all things that you learn as a toxicologist. So how can you say that you can trust this person for what this person is telling you, this scientist?
Well, investigating, making the job of finding the right person to talk to when you're a journalist is of course essential. And so when I started working on endocrine disruptors, the Endocrine Society was not active on this regulatory front. It was 15 years ago. And I turned to the scientists who were the pioneers in the research of EDCs. The people who I took the list of people who were at Wingspread, and I started from there.
Okay.
So there's always, if you want to find the right expert who has the right expertise, it's not that difficult. So you and today on the EDC issue, one can say it's almost very easy. The Endocrine Society has done a lot on this. They have produced consensus documents, review of literature, which are really a reference for whoever.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an important question because see, for example, for the COVID-19 recently, you have seen on TV or some doctors that are, for example, in intensive care, some of them, and then suddenly speaking about epidemiology and things like that, which is, I mean, close to their field, but not exactly, their field. So I think the public can has to know it's not enough to be a doctor to be able to speak about something. It's you have to have some knowledge of the field, exactly the field, and sometimes the fields are quite, you know, focused, and it's not so easy. So.
Yes, and that's a more global problem
Yes.
of the image of science, huh? in the public's opinion, but also, I mean, in everybody's opinion, science is like something different. It's like a different planet. It's almost like I used to say, it's almost like the Shire in the Lord of the Ring. You know, science and you scientists are hobbits, and you are working with your white blouses, you know, and in total objectivity. But this is not how things work. Science is also a part of society and is surrounded with many interest stakes, and scientists are humans. But the problem is that for lots of decision makers, whatever speaks science is science, and it's not the case. So, and there's of course for these the issue is different when you're talking about the public or the authorities, but going to the competent persons shouldn't be that difficult, right? It's not like we are pretty well organized.
It's yeah. Well, I guess maybe the best scientists are those who know that they don't know. I mean, or that they know everything. So that's I think easier. Somebody asked whether you as, you know, journalists interested in science have a sort of college of journalists, and you have some like quality criteria that among you about who is a scientist, how to do it, etc., or is it you know, each journalist does, you know, what he or she wants?
No, we don't really have that because of journalists are lone wolves most of the time. Even though I'm fighting culture by developing cross-border collaborations or cross-professional collaborations, but it's also about sharing. For example, I work in the environment section of Le Monde, and we share when someone's looking. Do you know anyone who can talk to me about the pesticides, the effect of pesticides on this health issue? And then my colleague Stéphane and I, we think, let me think, and because we've been interacting with the scientific community for a while, so we also share.
Okay, that's yeah. Well, lone wolves. I mean, some people say that scientists are lone wolves also. I mean, that's which is true for some of them. But maybe I would like to highlight the fact that you know, as scientists, we are in a sort of schizophrenic situation where, on one hand, scientists in the field of environment, I mean, on one hand, you know, public authorities ask us to support the valorization of what we are doing and make it, you know, supporting the economy of our country or Europe, whatever, because we are taking public money and it should be useful one way or another. And the way to be useful is supporting the economy. And on the other hand, you know, the relationship between the academic scientists, at least, and the industry is complex. I mean, if you want to have your say and if you want to have a comment that is not devoid of conflict of interest, it's not always so easy.
Well, it depends how you see what supporting the economy means. Preventing chronic diseases and I mean, the cost of disease is huge for society, so it's also participating to the economic efforts to produce research on those issues. And the economic aspect.
I agree. I totally agree. That's an excellent answer. It's just that the economy can be long-term or short-term, and that's the major, you know, point. And I completely agree. I think we have now to stop this part of our discussion and open the larger discussion with all the speakers that should now appear. And please make sure, I think all our microphones are open, but make sure there is not, you know, parasite noise in your place. So because we are all open, and we have to start a global discussion. And I ask the audience, if you have some more global issues that you would like to discuss, it would be really great. We have to get back to the credibility. I mean, that's the important point here. And we can also speak about communication. But you know, there are many ways of identifying or defining the credibility in terms of in science, which is, the first one is just about communication, knowing how to communicate and having a good science education in the citizens so that the communication hits the right place and we can do a good communication, and that's how credibility is increased. But maybe there are, you know, other ways for to produce credibility by combining maybe a larger openness to society and including more the citizens in what we are saying and what we are thinking, you know, in the discussion early on. And so that for the credibility of the expertise to be, you know, high, it's not only about having a good scientist stating things, you know, in an understandable way, but also about having in the process of expertise, getting the opinion of different stakeholders, maybe citizens, one way or another, having a real dialogue maybe with the citizens, so that this would increase our credibility. Can you discuss these points? I mean, this is the major point of our session too, about how can expertise become credible, and what should we do about that. So let me start by the end of this talk, because this is, I mean, Stéphane, how would you define, how would you say that we can, how would we increase credibility of the scientific speech in general and expertise?
Well, I think, well, it's always complicated for me to state a position on this, because it's not really my role in society to propose solutions. But there's a double filter, I think, that could be applied. Well, first is to check conflict of interest. Well, in a broad sense, in the sense that economic interest should not enter the science. Of course, the economy has to be taken into account at some point, but that's a decision maker's thing to do. It's not, the scientists shouldn't take the economic account. They should take into account only science. So yeah, the conflicts of interest first, and then of course to be sure to ask advice to scientists who know the state of the science. You don't ask, and that's a problem that is a problem very specific to regulatory agencies, is to have groups of scientists, working groups of people who are experts because they are experts, and so they have been expertise for years, and this is why they were picked up to make a working group. And this is, we had this example very recently with a group by the European Food Safety Agency on non-monotonic dose response, so specifically on endocrine disruptors. And the group of scientists who were picked up by EFSA are not people who have ever done lab work on EDCs. They are expert. It doesn't mean, I don't imply that they are not competent, but the fact is that they have never done any lab work, and the reason why they were picked up as experts is because they are on the list of experts, and that's not good enough a reason.
Just let me add, there are some very good computational scientists that analyze non-monotonic curves, and that are really good at, you know, they are useful. I think sometimes they can have their same as much as somebody who did the experiment at the lab. I mean, this is a really important, in computational science here is really relevant. But I think this is not what you meant. I understand what you mean. It's always the problem, who is the expert?
Yeah, there was there was not a single endocrinologist that was involved in this in the elaboration of this report.
So Anne, kind of credibility.
Remarkable.
Well, I think that a scientist also can gain credibility when he or she is open to discuss how the research has come into being. And this means being open on the funding of the research. This also means being open on the assumption on which the research is based. So, because scientists start off also with some assumptions on how things work, and they do that just in order to build a model, for example, but just being open on that allows also people to make a better judgment about the quality of the outcome of the research, and also to indicate where there is still uncertainty remaining after the results are there, what they are still doubting about, and what on what things extra research is needed. So that I think is important, because that that refrains from the idea that science is developed in an ivory tower and only truth is coming out of it. It can be discussed, and it should be discussed to have a valuable discussion. And that, for me, builds credibility.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, there are not many professions. I mean, for example, when we write a paper, very often we are asked at the end to state the limitations of our study. I mean, and how many professions after a report, whatever it is, at the end they say, well, maybe what I'm saying is maybe completely wrong because of this weakness in my study. Yeah, you know, I didn't have enough number of patients, and maybe so. I mean, there are not so many, and so. But this is good science to me. I mean, of course, and this should increase credibility. Although, you know, some people may think otherwise. Angel, what do you think about credibility?
Yeah, well, that's I've done to trying to increase credibility to the message is to join the group of the Endocrine Society from the very beginning. So really, when the members of the group, we have been talking to policymakers or to the public in the media, we do it as the Endocrine Society. So I have my personal points of view, but it's discussed with the rest of the group. So we have always different inputs, feedbacks. The group is a variety of expertise. We all have interest in endocrinology and endocrine disruptors, of course, and we work on that, but from different point of view. Someone as me are more physiologists, other are more toxicologists, other are epidemiologists, other are clinicians. So this is how the final message, I think, has a higher credibility, because it's not an individual message of a single scientist. And on the other hand, as you were saying, the limitations are reduced. I'm not going to say that we don't have any limitation, because it's not true, of course. We don't know everything. No one knows everything. But we try to decrease the limitations in that way. So I normally have done it this way. So I never go myself, you know, to the European Commission or giving my own opinion, at least is they ask me for that, you know. I can do it with the media myself, but in general, I do it this way. And I think it's good. And what you say about citizenships, the citizens participating, I think is very good and very interesting. So the point, for instance, of using scientific societies involved in this field, and the relationship between both, this has to be enhanced and has to be potentiated, you know, because this is the right way to have scientific societies as in the middle of citizens and the politicians, you know, and policymakers.
But you think scientific societies communicate enough with citizens and take up their point of view?
I think they are starting to do that now, at least in this field. So I think the Endocrine Society started a few years ago, and the ones I know, for instance, the European Society for Endocrinology started a couple of years ago, later than the Endocrine Society, but it is being very active now, and this is good. Before they didn't want to listen about endocrine disruptors, to be honest. And in my own country, I think few societies are starting to communicate with the public. I would say in general terms, not only for endocrine disruptors. So this is something new that I think societies are aware, and I hope citizens start realizing that the societies are there. And, you know, this is, for instance, my field of diabetes is normally very active between Society of Diabetes and diabetic patients. So we have to profit that for other, you know, other issues.
Yeah, I think that's a nice example. I think diabetes. And I would like to have your opinion on that. Do scientific societies communicate enough with citizens? I mean, even to challenge what Angel is saying.
Yeah, I think what Angel also highlighted is that it is a big job to communicate between disciplines, scientific disciplines. And they, even though they often all have a PhD and they are well acquainted with the vocabulary, it still remains a big challenge to talk the same language and to build a common understanding about something. And because of the difficulty of that, one often neglects the fact that there is an outer world behind the academia as well, that also could help to frame the outcomes, to ask questions that could be triggering and helping you to frame or to formulate the message in a clearer way. And I think that is a challenge that scientists should be more open to. And I would welcome more initiatives in which scientists try to communicate their message in a way that is understandable for just normal people who don't have the specific expertise, and let them help you interpret the messages, and also to get it clear how to formulate your messages in the direction of policymakers. Also for that, it could be good to open up the discussions and to have more a dialogue or even a trialogue, if you like. So that would be my suggestion.
Okay, but you think that citizens understand uncertainties? For example, I would like to label this compound as a possible endocrine disruptor. From a scientific point of view, I have to do it. I mean, I cannot say it's a fully accepted endocrine disruptor. Some others, it's a presumed endocrine disruptor, and then you have very few that are absolutely clear endocrine disruptors. I mean, as a scientist, I like to do that because you don't have all the evidence all the time. Do you think that the citizens understand that and can appreciate it, and or you think they prefer a sort of black and white?
Often that is the case, and that's we see also in the pandemia as well. Often it is heard in the media. Just say what is needed, and people want a black or white answer to a question, while we know that often it's gray is the right answer, and then there is still a lot of variation to it. I think from the experiences that we have in Flanders, we know that if you involve citizens in a long-term process in which you take them with you along the way in setting up the research on human biomonitoring, helping them to understand the results, and also allowing them to ask questions and help to interpret the results, that they often feel very welcomed and also are open to the various opinions that there are. And they often also accept that there is no white or black answer, that the answer is gray. So, but that takes an effort, because if you, in the society of today with quick communication and people want a quick answer, it's often hard and they want a black or white answer. But if you take them in a process, yes, it can be possible to help them understand that there is uncertainty and that there is a lot of nuance.
So maybe to Stéphane, should scientists communicate directly to the citizens, you think, or should they try to go through a mediator, which are the media, and ask the media maybe to better, do this communication maybe more professionally? Or what do you think of that? What's your opinion?
But that's a very complicated thing. I mean, part of my job is to, or my job, not as me, but a journalist's job is to translate this knowledge to the public and to digest complex information and to make it understandable. So of course the media has a role to play, but I don't know. I think there are many ways, and in the past, I think decade or so, that the scientific community has made huge efforts to engage more with the public, and I think it's very important to do so. And because going back to the previous question about uncertainty, I mean, this is precisely where the manufacture of doubt is taking place. This transforming uncertainty, this process in science, uncertainty, like pushing the borders of uncertainty further and further, because you gain knowledge, and this is the normal scientific process. And this is where you put precaution when you don't know, where you're not sure, you have information but you don't know. This is part of the scientific process. Precaution is a very scientific, precautionary principle is a very scientific idea. And this is the problem of this, the lobbying and the propaganda of industries who don't want their products to be regulated. They are transforming this uncertainty into doubt, and they are muddling the waters of the debate. This is why it's very complicated when you don't have, I mean, if you look just on the social networks, the industry players are much more present than the Endocrine Society, for example. And of course, the social networks are not the opinion, but it is shaping the opinion of some decision makers, of journalists, of people who have an influence on the public debate. So, and of course, industry has understood that, and they are very present on social networks.
But this question also relates. I mean, what is more efficient, basically? So, if I asked another provocative question, who the citizens trust most? Scientists, journalists, social media influencer? Who do you think the citizens trust more? Because Anne,
Well, I think I think that it depends
they don't trust
on the level of education. People always search for information via the canals that they know. And for example, if I would be confronted with a disease, a serious disease, then due to my education, I would probably look in scientific journals and try to educate myself on what is going on. But I know the places where to look for that kind of solid, scientifically valid information. But if you would have somebody who only has, for example, a primary school diploma, then probably you will look more at social media fora. So people make use of the fora that are available to them, to make use of the sources that they know of. And I think it's also important to be aware of that mechanism and also try to reach people via different canals, different media than the social media, for example, and engage them in a dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay,
Well,
Miguel, what do you think?
I would say that most of the people trust more in the credibility of scientists. And I'm convinced of that. But the problem that I believe, in my opinion, is, as Stéphane Horel mentioned, is how they distinguish between the right scientists for a particular issue. I mean, you can go to the social media and you're going to find the Endocrine Society, many of my colleagues and your colleagues, and also the ones that Stéphane mentioned are there. So how I think it's difficult for the citizens in general to choose which one is the best. And as has been said as well, some are more powerful than others in this social media, and you know, it's plenty of their message that happens with this. And I mean, there is also some people that believe that the earth is flat, you know, and it happens.
That's right. Okay, it happens, yeah. Let me shift a little bit, and as you know, in this expertise field, I mean, there is a major player that we didn't discuss. It's the agencies, the safety agencies, that their role is to provide the expertise to the decision makers, and we are, here hosted by, one of those agencies, Anses, and their role is to sum up the scientific basis and to provide this expertise to the decision makers. So, do you think that there are? I mean, can you comment on that role? And do you think they should be more open to society and involve more citizen opinion? I mean, I'm talking about the agencies themselves, not only the scientists or Endocrine Society or whatever. Stéphane, you want to comment? You mentioned that you have been criticizing Anses, so you see Anses is inviting you, so that's great. But you want to comment on the role specifically of the expertise agency from your point of view?
Well, I think probably some agencies should take science into account more. It's just that. Of course, there are differences between agencies. There are different cultures, and well, on the EDC issue, the EFSA, the European Food Safety Authority, hasn't been like at the front, on the scientific issues, and they've created groups that had scientists with conflicts of interest, experts that have no expertise, like the last we mentioned on non-monotonic dose response with no endocrinologist. So there's a real problem in this. I won't talk about Anses specifically because I haven't worked recently on how Anses works, but it's a global problem, I think, of this experts. I think it's as important a problem as conflicts of interest. Those experts that are on the list of experts, and that they have been on the list of experts for like forever, and so it's easier to pick someone from this list at the EU level, someone who's been a member of the EU scientific committees for 2 decades, because hey, he's been here for a while, so let's ask his advice. But those people have been retired sometimes for 20 years. They have no idea what's going on in the labs. And there's also this aspect of outdated scientific thinking or different scientific schools. I mean, we've had this very I think it's not accurate description of the debates on EDCs separating toxicologists and endocrinologists. Well, an eminent toxicologist, who's Andreas Kortenkamp, was very present on these debates and it was on the endocrine side of the story. So I think it's not really true to portray this as a separation between two disciplines, but still there's a mindset in the toxicology world. Of course, toxicology was designed to set acceptable thresholds of exposure. So it starts from the principle that you can expose people or the environment to certain doses of chemical. It's a different mindset, and this, of course, regulatory toxicology is what agencies.
Well, you know, one of the major policies of the EU currently is called zero pollution. I mean, that's one of the major aims. It is still under progress, and so zero pollution is, you know, that's a major aim. Let's hope that we get close to it at least. And we have a question that wants us to maybe reflect a little bit more on what did endocrine disruptor change in the risk assessment and the risk management in general, or what they will eventually change in the future. Well, I think first that we have now, as I said in the introduction, it's really a different type of toxicity based on interrupting, you know, some physiological communication between organs, and it's maybe larger than for endocrine system. We talk a lot about the endocrine system. I mean, in immunology, there's a lot of communication between cells, and also disrupting those can be critical. In neuroscience, in neurology, there's a lot of communication, obviously, and you can have something. So it's a different type of toxicity that may not be as maybe simple that introducing a mutation in a gene and then getting something wild. We have insisted on the fact that vulnerable populations are more likely to get toxicity, and this is extremely present in the endocrine disruption field because of this physiology of the hormonal physiology, and that's something I think has been really introduced. So it's more about than just looking at the substance and its toxicity, immediate toxicity. It's more looking at toxicity in the more global physiological context, and that's, I think, something that endocrine disruptors have really brought. And also we mentioned the dose issue, and it's not so easy. At one point we said it's a non-threshold point. It's been contested by some. I mean, that it's a non-threshold because the hormones have a dose response that is quite clear. But I think there are good reasons for that. It's some endocrine disruptors, some of them act at low doses, and it may be difficult to define the safe dose under these conditions. And also, I think the other issue is that if we believe in genotoxicity on one hand, maybe we should look into epigenotoxicity. I mean, the toxicity on the epigenome, on the methylation, and how should we consider that, with threshold or without threshold? This is something we have to reflect on and work a little bit more on in the future. So I think the presence of the physiological context on one hand is something that is important. The time lags is a major issue also in the field of endocrine disruptor and the programming, and this is something we should also take into consideration, the vulnerability and the general context. So these are many reasons why I think endocrine disruptor will have changed and will change the risk assessment. Not to talk about mechanism and mixtures and mixture effect related to mechanism. I think that's also a very critical field. But I think it may be a start for a new type of toxicants, and that may involve other. And I would love to see the Neuroscience Society, the Immunology Society get as much involved in toxicology as the Endocrine Society has done. Any comment on? I mean, this is just trying to answer one of the questions that was asked for the chairman to really sum up.
Yeah, well,
Angel,
I
you
think you have summarized very well the situation just now. I just would like to add that in terms of risk, we all know that it's a function of hazard and exposure. And what we have tried to now is to decrease exposure. And this is the paradigm that we need to change. We need to decrease hazard. And if it's zero, it's better. And we have green chemistry or sustainable chemistry to do that. So we need to change our minds, the society in general, to a complete different paradigm, you know, in the next years. Otherwise, this will never be solved. And that's all, yeah. That's it, yeah, thank you.
Sorry, go ahead. Okay. That's it. Okay, last comment, Anne?
Well, I'm not really a specialist, so I'm reluctant to dig into the depth. But in general, I think that indeed the fact that endocrine disruptors are being looked at as a gathering of a lot of substances, it challenges scientists to look at, for example, mixture effects, etc., which can give important information also on how harmful they are for humans. And I think that there has been done a lot of work, but there is still a lot of challenges to be done. I think that the agencies should take into account that kind of very challenging and new scientific work more into their assessment of the problem. And I also think that it is important for agencies to open up, to make clear what types of experts that they are inviting for the discussion, and also to evolve more from a strict risk management approach in the regulatory context. And I know that they are regulated themselves a lot, but to evolve more to openness and to just accepting that it is a very complex issue, and not to minimize the complexity, but embrace the complexity to its full extent, and also to have a discussion on what should we do with it. And I think that could be a challenge for a lot of agencies. There is a lot of work on the table for them on that matter, I think. But I see some positive indications that things are changing also with the agencies.
Yeah, I'm sure. Stéphane, you want something to say as a last word, to comment? No? Okay. You're fine? Okay, thank you. So now I would really like to thank everybody. I think we had a nice discussion. We have tried to address all the issues that were raised in the questions and answers. I hope we may have missed some of them, but I hope we didn't miss much. I think it's an open dialogue, and it's an open discussion that will go on, more and more. I think much progress has been made. In fact, I mean, the challenges are higher, so that sometimes we feel there's not enough progress, but I think much progress has been made. I can see that from different scientists and different agencies opening to the public much more than we would have thought about it 10 years ago from now. So I agree with Anne that there has been much progress, and I hope there will be still even more in the future. I would like to remind everybody that you can see us again on YouTube by the end, I think by the end of February. The Anses will put on the Anses channel on YouTube. So these are social media. So you can listen again if you have listened, but there are many people who have registered and were not able to attend. So you can tell them that they can really listen to our discussions by maybe a couple of weeks from now at the Anses channel of YouTube. And with that, I would like to close the session again, thanking you, the speakers, and thanking all the people who stayed all the way to the end for this important and interesting session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.